So we both work in a way for or and with the Catholic Church. And Guido Preparata put out this book, Empire and State.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago. I think I read it a year ago, and I
Empire and
couldn't.
Church.
And
Empire and
Church,
Church.
excuse me,
Yeah.
Empire and Church. I couldn't really fall asleep that night. That book really, really challenges. Okay, and so
Okay.
here's why I wanted to sidebar with you. One, because I have massive respect for your opinions and for the work that you do with the Regeneration podcast. But also you work, I think, with the institutional church, the hierarchical church.
I do.
You've had a lot of experience doing that. So here's what I'm very curious to mostly just sit back and walk around this with you for maybe a half hour and talk with you about this. Knowing, first of all, let's recap this book. And I think you said you reread it recently.
I did.
So
I did.
I'd like to get that sense of it from you. And then knowing then what you know and the respect that we have for Guido, where does that leave us in trying to navigate not just day jobs, but collaborating with an institution like this, making the best of a bad business or seeing the best, the gold amid the dross, that sort of thing. Yeah, maybe let's just start there with perhaps an overview of this book. Before doing that, I'd like to understand a little bit more what it is that you do in your role. So for me, I work specifically to help build up the body of Christ, build up the Church of Christ by helping men get into small groups at their parish to solve the crisis of loneliness among men at the parish level. So we work very closely with a lot of parish priests and with dioceses and directors of evangelization, that sort of thing. So we are, in my day job, actively trying to build up this network of communities that is the aggregate of how the hierarchy functions in mediating the magisterium and specifically what the Holy Father is trying to bring to the world. And this is again why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I have mad respect for Pope Francis. Now, it is qualified, especially after reading this book, but I still have a huge respect for him. And then reading this book, I now struggle. So again, a little bit of why this conversation matters to me, because I come from a radical traditionalist cult, and over the last 10 years have been deconstructing what I thought I knew was Christianity, Catholicism. And Pope Francis has been kind of this guardian angel figure that I met while re-engaging with Catholicism. And I have absolutely loved so much of what he's had to say. Every opinion is not canonized, obviously, but I'm with a lot of his people from South America who hold him up as he is a gift to the church in the modern world.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true.
He's made changes that there's no going back from.
Well, and this is what I'm excited to walk around with you. See where this goes. Final point from Guido. He raises points in his book that are not only very challenging and very compelling, but these are points, for example, he mentions like the different mafias in play and how they've never really let go power and stuff like that. I have deliberately avoided engaging with these lines of thought because they were so prevalent to my cult-ridden background. They continue to be in a lot of these channels online, and I've just dismissed them. To have someone I respect like Guido go, no, there is a very grave truth in some of this. Well, and so maybe you can sort of see there's like pieces that I can't all fit together. And how do I go to sleep as a faithful Catholic, trying to understand what it means to put all of this together? So there's a whole bunch on the table. Perhaps could we start with what is it that you do with your role working at the Abbey of Genesis?
And I'm going to weave them together.
Okay, you're good at that.
Yeah, I'm also teaching a course on Catholic social thought at the graduate level at St. Bernard's Institute this semester. And I work for, I'll go there a little bit. I work for the Diocese of Rochester for the wonderful Bishop Salvatore Matano, and I run pastoral services, which is kind of convening things like campus ministries, the pastoral ministers, pastoral associates. But a lot, I run the Department of Migrant Ministry, very busy as of late. We're a blessed Office of Cultural Ministries, Office of Life, technically the Office of Liturgy, but that's where I just kind of punt to the bishop's office and things like that. But and I've run the retreat houses at the Abbey of the Genesee, Trappist Monastery, and I've been in campus ministry at SUNY Geneseo. Did that for like 25 years. And I think I mention those things because it's probably through the teaching of the Catholic social thought class. I think to understand some of what Guido Preparata is doing, the best way I can help people, fully human, fully divine in one sense, but we got to piece this out because the story brings up darkness. And it's the, let's say from Hilaire Belloc entitled, a book, Europe is the Church and the Church is Europe, and it might have been Europe is the Faith or the Faith is Europe. But I'll make the statement, for a while, that's who you were. As the theologian Bill Kavanaugh and others remind us, for so long, you didn't know the country of France. You were Catholic and you were Burgundy, and things like that, the language of French and so forth. So think of like the church and people's consciousness as one for many years, in the Western Roman Church. And then you have the Reformation. This is just so seismic, right? That there could be an other in this field. Right. Where did it come from? And then for me, the biggie is the French Revolution. The French Revolution. That all of a sudden, you had the Great Schism. You had the constant war between the Guelphs and the Gibelines. Was the state going to, and that's a story that Guido wants to tell. Was the state going to dominate the church? Was the church going to dominate the state? There's a dance there, and it goes back a long time. But from Catholic social thought, since 1789, you see the church just coming to terms with what's going on, taking a few steps forward. Then we find, we started, there were social encyclicals written before Rerum Novarum, but we start saying it became a little bit coherent then. But Guido wants to tell a story that is to say he's continuing that working out. And I don't know if anybody, and a lot of our listeners might be interested, a key line that Guido cites in his book, New Directions in Catholic Social and Political Thought. Brilliant book. Team of writers all over the map. In terms of politics and things. Yeah, you have an Opus Dei priest, you have some Jesuits, you have Guido writing things. It's just wild. But the where we are now, he'll quote that Romano Guardini once said, kind of yearning for a day. The guy was an intellectual. He knew the Vatican, Guardini. But he was just wondering if somewhere in one of his conversations, if somebody was going to take an interest on behalf of the Catholic fold in how Leviathan acquires power, right? So
when you use the word or the concept Leviathan, this is the what? The body of what Antichrist is across time or something?
Yeah, or in this case would be those who are calling the shots, those who are in power in the Western world or anywhere.
Deep church, deep state line
Yeah,
sort of thing?
Yeah, we don't even need to get there. Those who are kind of like in charge, putting their boot on ahead of other people just because they can.
Right.
How do they get the ability to do that? Because you look around you and you see man and humanity to man. And so within that context, there's a very ironic, pacifist, humanist, Christian template going on in Preparata's work, which will, to quote you in your email to me, could keep you up at night, and what's going on in our country directly relates. He's going to be the man of the hour. He's going to be the man of the hour. He kind of saw it. And he would be worried that questioning of a questioning of our dance. If you look at the USAID story now, National Endowment for Democracy, who's dancing with who and who's profiting and who's leading the dance? These are questions right now. And again, we followed that from the French Revolution, Lamennais, these great characters trying to work it out, the relationship church and state. A guy who laid the template of most of what we're working on under now as the kind of modus operandi, church and state. Lamennais, right after the French Revolution, was writing these books. They're crazy. They're wonderful. I love them. But he had two encyclicals written against him in particular. Like, what an honor. And now it was about democracy, the working arrangement we have. He was forging that. And we've kind of come to adopt it. But this is a continuous story. And Guido wants to say, in short, in the book Empire and Church, written kind of in two parts. One was an afterword to a book written by Sean Stone, who's Oliver Stone's son. And he was just talking about kind of the ruling cliques in Britain. One way of trying to get at it, just the question of what's going on. Some people look around you, and I always go back to the book of Genesis. Eventually God's asking us, like, where are you? Right? Where are you? And some of us, and I have this, Guido is younger than me by a month, I think. He's just smarter than me. And his dad, to understand him, people should Google Giuliano Preparata. And he comes from a family. Giuliano Preparata was one of these geniuses tenured in physics at Princeton before he was age 23. I don't know. Wow. And so But the thing you look up when you're looking to understand Guido is that his dad, there's paradigms in science, and Guido knows science. He also has a lot to say about Charles Darwin, um, and that his dad is famous for a poem, or people have written poems about his dad who had to take on the Richard Feynman hypothesis, which was really path-breaking for a time. But whenever you have to supersede something and get to a new way, you end up being an icebreaker. I like the image of a dandelion growing up through concrete. Is that violence? But there's still a lot of power behind it. And his dad, it took him a lot of power to break down the paradigm in science. And there's whole stories with that, of where the world's gone since then, but the Feynman thing. And so Guido knows how there's a model there that sometimes you got to be pretty fierce, but you're at heart, you're a pacifist. You're very ironic. I've had the privilege of spending time with him and his family. I wrote to him asking for an article that was supposed to cost money. Of course, he just throws the whole library for free. That's just who he is. And then I don't know, you develop a correspondence. So we end up meeting in Europe, at this crazy conference. But it's to say, after World War II, and this guy Mike Benz, who's the man of the hour on kind of what's going on with USAID, he's casting more of this, where it's the right condemning the left for their use of the USAID. But in Guido's book, New Directions, just so people know, he's got an article in there by an Opus Dei priest saying that neoconservative hijacking was essentially the same thing on the other side when we started bombing Iraq back into the Stone Age. It bothers me to see the corruption story of state dancing with church is going to be polarized in this country as a leftist phenomenon. We're at a moment, as they say, an inflection point where let's just tell the story accurately. Let's just not get it recast into the culture wars. It's too important at this time. But he tells the story in these two different essays. One was the afterword. The other one was an essay I think he wrote for another book. And then he writes a new introduction. But he's tracing the story from World War II, which Mike Benz is saying, is that in essence, we're still working out that dance. And the church got into a struggle. It was still trying to find its relationship with the state. Stalin says, where are the Pope's divisions, right? That's a big thing. When the church was it, when it could throw men to the field to die in battle, and the Crusades were kind of from the bottom up. But that dance gets really dirty at times. And you see the church kind of keeping an ember in two fires because it was worried about falling into complete geopolitical insignificance. And to keep itself alive, and there's a larger discussion of where are we supposed to be. I kind of like a powerless church. Ivan Illich was talking about this. It might be happening in real time.
I'm curious to put a pin in the idea to come back with the Nostalgia podcast, where they talk about there should be temporal expression of perhaps an ascendant church or something in the temporal sphere. Maybe we'll come back to that, but I don't know what to do with all of this. But please keep going.
These are the issues, and it's fun. And we need to do it with a sense of humor. We need to do it fun, and because we're stitching the world back together. And it's only going to become when people have conversation and they're not yelling at each other in flame wars. And it's none of the good stuff that's possible at this moment can be built on anything other than people talking and honest conversation. Somebody I look up to a lot has said we need a new religious order just dedicated to listening to each other without prejudice. And that's where we begin. So I encourage anybody listening, don't confuse means and ends during this time. Just engage with others. Get to know people. Be interested in what others are doing. Don't go in all defensive and weird. But so Guido tells the story that the dalliance we were doing, we just kept on losing and losing. And then, and you can raise out the parts, Dominic, that I'm willing to talk about any part of it. But that it kind of gets to, during this dance, you might say we're always playing different games. And just like the USAID story is playing out, are we the kind of Catholic Charities wing? Is that our main significance now? The Catholic Charities wing of the New World Order is a question he's asking. And these are very alive in our time. And he's suggesting towards the end of the book that, formally, it's almost like we declared ineptitude, that we said we sold out. That's his working thesis, that we sold out. And the reason that we could test that, if you're a scientist, is to say with exceptions of a few little outcroppings here or there, the media story that the Catholic Church is the cesspool of all iniquity, which is a nice one. He goes, that's pretty much done. They don't need it anymore. The story he tells has to do with like us trying to stop the Iraq War. We tried some things with John Paul II. He wants to tell that story. I encourage people to read it. And he tells the story of the transition from, it's all conjecture, but from the transition of John Paul II to the kind of stepping down of Pope Benedict to where we are now, as kind of, he sees those as directly related to this kind of repositioning. Benedict tried to give it a go with kind of a one last swan song, and that maybe Pope Francis was there to try and negotiate a good surrender. How would you read it in the book, Dominic? Is that what do you think?
Again,
Guido's saying?
it's been about a year, I think, if not over a year since I've read it. So I don't remember these details with clarity.
Yeah, it's almost like whether it's just a reduced model, I'm a coming to terms with, but implied there is and he sees Pope Francis holding the line on some things, like the transgender piece and some of the abortion even he's been strong on lately. But Guido would see him, and it's funny, during the way we're talking about immigration right now, Guido's an anarchist. He's a progressive. And he sees the immigration piece not so much as just bringing people across borders to vote Democratic, which might be a theory among some. But in Europe, it's eventually that, he'll call him, he uses the social scientist in America, Thorstein Veblen, as a central reference point. And to our great detriment, we don't read Veblen. He would say the greatest American mind ever to exist. I think Guido would say far exceeds his own powers of analysis. But the Veblen would call what some people call deep state or anything, would call it the ruling clubs. I don't know if that's the ruling clubs. It's kind of what some people are getting at. You could say permanent Washington. Sometimes I bring that up with people during our own podcast. But he would say that essentially the Vatican, by its actions, essentially said, we'll be the Catholic Charities wing of those ruling clubs. That's what he wants to say. And it's, as a scientist, let's start seeing if we can explain more about what's going on with that. Yep.
Yeah. The thing, so that's just so fascinating. I think I vaguely remember what you're talking about with these different, I think that it makes sense for him that Benedict did, quote, cave to pressure and made a tactical withdrawal or something from the different mafias involved. I don't even remember very clearly. And everything basically is this sort of sacerdotal chess game, which on the one hand, I can understand. And there's this movie that came out recently called Conclave, which is very much about the election of a new pope.
It yet. Yeah.
Okay. I enjoyed it in many respects. Bits I didn't like, but I mean, who loves anything completely? But the movie actually ends with, I would think, a very tacit nod to the genius and the charism of what the church is trying to be, whether or not they actually accept the sort of divine participatory, nature of the thing. But as somebody who's doing the whole ascent of mind and will and trying to follow the magisterium and learn from the Holy Father as a figure, to also at the same time hold that there is this chess game where they're playing curry, playing favor with the geopolitical powers that be. And what does that mean for us if, I don't know, maybe it's, and this is where I'm curious to walk around this with you, because I'm trying to now re-navigate or renegotiate my relationship with effectively the hierarchy. Because I don't know exactly who to trust. There's not very many that I like. And so I don't want to walk in eyes closed on a situation that is very flawed, very human. It doesn't seem to be the smart thing. We do need, if Vatican II, if we are trying to live out the call of Vatican II, which is we the people, if however you say that, have a co-mission with the hierarchy of the church to do something, then there's a part in this that we play, not checks and balances. It's the wrong way to think about it, but there's two hands that go together, applying pressure on each other to accomplish the same goal. We're working together and not just routinely bowing the head the way we were back in the 1700s to the way the hierarchy was mediated or communicated to us. I'm not sure if I'm being coherent here.
No, I follow everything. Yeah.
It's finding that sense of, where does my freedom end, I guess? How do I maintain my freedom? Maybe more importantly, how do I contribute to a better future where, and this is the sense I get from Guido, where the strings are being tied or the noose is being tightened around all of us with the hive and with the parasites, as he refers to, and he talks about the hierarchy being made up of a lot of these parasites. And I think it seems that he would lump Pope Francis in with that, whereas I see more of like an icebreaker, somebody trying to break out or change many things, fighting maybe a rearguard action against it all. I don't know. So I'm curious, where does some of this land with you?
Yeah, no, you're asking the $1,000,000 questions. I think about this stuff a lot, Dominic. Um, yeah, I would say, and I wonder exactly what Guido would say. He might be on the Regeneration podcast. I think maybe this Saturday, where
Oh,
he
cool.
and I talk all the time. But and it would be this type of stuff. But Pope Francis could be a Janus-faced figure. That.
Okay.
But weren't we always Janus-faced figures? We might be realizing in our time again that this dance with power
Mm-hmm.
is something that we might have been even pre-existing. We could still go back. I don't want to put, 40,000 people died in Paris alone during the French Revolution. But
Right.
I'm saying, so let's just focus on what we can control about ourselves, the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the stance with power hasn't been that great,
Yeah.
and so that, when I highlight, that especially since the French Revolution, that we've kept on trying to do the dance, it doesn't mean, I think even in Guido's book, and you might remember this, and I forget exactly where, Guido points out that there were several opportunities for the church to get maybe total control again,
Mm.
or really wade into the waters too deeply, and has shown some restraint.
Okay.
So we're
Yeah.
not saying it's two bloodthirsty cobras going at it,
Right.
but
Right.
negotiating this. It's about a church that could actually worry without some geopolitical power. Think
Mm-hmm.
about the role of the Jesuits. I don't know that story too well, but I know there's people who think they're behind every conspiracy. But let's just say
Yeah.
we're producing a class of people whose main thing was maybe this game. Let's say that whole thing isn't really our shtick.
Mm-hmm.
Then Pope Francis is like a lot of people, just trying to figure out what to do with this, like Pope
Mm-hmm.
Benedict did. John Paul II, I think, tried to maybe leap over some of that miasma by
Mm-hmm.
going direct, using media in a way. But then
Right.
who are you dancing with when you're relying on the media? So
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll be able to tell a story of like all these kind of well-intentioned,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful dances.
Right.
And maybe Pope Francis left us, with synodality, something that's real. I think we're still trying to find it out here. It looks
Mm-hmm.
kind of farcical here in the U.S., but it's because, um, by running migrant ministries, I see something very different in the Mexican church. They don't have all these political religions standing in the holy place. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
indigenous. It's kind of from the bottom up. It seems a little more natural, and
Right. Right.
for them, the idea of bottom up doesn't sound so. For us in America, at its best, it sounds like a long bureaucratic staff meeting.
Mm.
But I've seen it in the Vietnamese community, and I've kind of seen it in the Mexican community. When the Holy Spirit's actually in the room, there's no such thing as being bored, folks.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so this is, and so here's the craziest thing I'll say tonight. But we can be. I'm praying for Pope Francis during this conclave. Like I love the guy,
Mm-hmm.
and again,
Mm-hmm.
he's not alone having to have been Janus-faced.
Right.
Um, and Louis, I don't know, like all of them. Pope Pius XI with Quadragesimo Anno. He doesn't come across really well in Guido's book, and yet that's a beautiful encyclical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I want to cast that against that larger light. But a wild thing right now, if we put the primacy on praying for Pope Francis during this hour, and I don't know what's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen, but it is that this whole story that I followed early on, we had a guy on a podcast who I've known since long before our podcast, Thomas Jude Germanario, who just plays with things like physics, William Blake, poetry, and the world's mythology like nobody. And Bob
As
Dylan.
one does. Wow, that
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
Yeah. And we got to have him on again soon. I wrote to him last weekend. But
Okay.
he put me on touch with these St. Malachi prophecies. The story being told is, I don't know how old, but the early story was like 12th century. And I don't know if that's been proven wrong. But St. Malachi, and I might have the details wrong, and forgive me, listeners, but saw a motto. People who have visions kind of see things all at once. But he
Mm-hmm.
saw a motto associated with every forthcoming pope. And they're kind of interesting. And I can't tell the whole story, but people can. But I know that unless anybody disagrees with this, John the 23rd was associated with the motto, Pastor of the Seas. And here you have a
Mm-hmm.
guy like Patriarch of Venice and so forth. And okay, it's not too far of a stretch. I forget JP the first, John Paul II. We know his motto that was called Eclipse of the Sun. And I think it's the fact that he was born maybe on the day of a solar eclipse, and also the assassination attempt was on a solar eclipse.
Oh, wow.
At least that's the claim. And that Benedict was called Glory of the Olive Tree. And the closest I think you can get to that is the Olivetans. The Benedictines used to be called, sometimes they're called Olivetans. But the
Interesting.
interesting thing, Dominic, is that Pope Francis is the last of the line. And the moniker given to him, and I find it poetic and beautiful, if we need simplicity at the higher level, I believe I'm directly addressing your question. You can go from original harmony to discord, to a higher harmony that weaves in the discord. But there can be, and everybody, as you know, Ronald Knox in his book Enthusiasm, Harold Bloom, every time they look at these heresies that they call Gnostic, people are claiming to go back to the early church. But that, to me, that's a massive distraction, because the harmony we see in everything, like Western classical music, original harmony to discord, to higher harmony, from the Garden of Eden, kind of through the desert to the city of God, from original participation for Owen Barfield to alienation to final participation. There's about a billion ways of saying this, from the erotic to the ethical, to the erotic and ethical combined, from the feminine to the masculine, to the feminine and masculine combined. There's a symphony here, and what if that symphony, the higher simplicity, the second naivety, what if that began, should we be so embarrassed, or should we run from it because it happens to correspond with something that other people call the age of Aquarius? Chesterton said we need to paganize the church. You had paganism, but you had to kind of get that out, just like the divine feminine, at one level, Dominic, it can swallow you up, right? The she-wolf devours her own young. A type of mother can lock her kids in a tower, but so can alma mater, our universities, that way of schooling people, and so can a certain version of Mother Church. And so what if that second circle has complexity woven in? And so we don't have to be worried about, but we could, a second simplicity. Can't we pray for that in our time, that maybe at this time, instead of being the Republicans that are just being purists now, we should have never taken government money, but put yourself in their situation. All these, to understand all is to forgive all, in one sense. And I don't want to say there weren't dark crimes, but we can, we're coming out of this dance, and we're going to see that USAID, the storyline is on both sides. So let's get this out of partisan politics, and let's together work with our priests and with our bishops that give us the skeletal structure. And the laity you're talking about, the church as it and the church as she. And the church as she is coming into her own right now, that the laity, Bishop Matano doesn't want every activity like smart Catholics to come under the diocesan umbrella. Go be Catholic, Dominic, go be Catholic. And we give even the Father Ed Dillon, who I've had on the podcast, one of my great, great mentors, a real life mentor for me. I could often accuse him that he's thought more about the papacy in one day than I think about it in 2 weeks. Eventually we're going to have to move our thought and you got to step into your power. You got to step into your glory of the laity and start to do more, And see, I'm not pitting the hierarchy against the, but we're so festered on that. And most people I know, liberal or conservative, they don't have a problem if we kind of step into it a little bit more. And some of them are going to be nervous. They want more control than maybe we're supposed to have after this all shakes out.
Right.
But it's got to shake itself out. In this age, the Holy Spirit, we can, something like that. A higher Joachim of Fioreism is fine too.
I agree. I think there's also, and I don't know if this is my read, not necessarily Guido's, but there's the sense sometimes I get that there's the devil, in most situations, especially when if you're the Holy Father and the leader of the human family, and you're dealing with geopolitical superpowers like he does, then you're having to make decisions that nobody else is truly going to understand. Probably everybody's going to hate, but it's like the local FBI allowing what do you call it, a specific gang to thrive because they're using it as a sting operation for a bigger network. But if you're the local police, all you see is the immediate failure of the situation. So I could understand that laddering up to the Holy Father. I could also understand not having 20/20 vision. And maybe that becoming clear in the decades after, once more information is available. So I could see all that happening. And then I could see throwing in 24/7 Twitter media to judge and evaluate every single decision the Holy Fathers had, to make. So that, but all of that to say, I don't know, Guido's book, it's a very challenging book, especially the concept of the parasites. So now then the question is, I think, second half of this conversation is, okay, so what do we do with this idea that there are the powers that be that are parasitically fastening on to culture and to human engaging and to human business, and not even just the church, but especially as Catholics, the church is sort of a starting point because it's where we go to how do I say this? Live out faith community, live out the rubrics in community together and in practice, so that like Israel, we can then be mediating this back out to our neighborhoods and to our parishes and supermarkets and daily jobs and so on, not just in the isolation of the perfecti, right? So I love the way that you just said this a moment ago, where you talked about what is the glory, the charge, the charism of the laity to step up and to contribute more as somebody in the role that you are, and you're looking at where we've been and what we get wrong in the First World War, especially America, but as perhaps we look into the future with what the Holy Father is, and well, not just him, those operating under the same magisterium that he's championing, the how do you say this? Not the puzzle pieces, the stepping stones that they're putting down. Where do you see it going? Like you mentioned synodality, and okay, we don't get this as white American, what is it, WASP, Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans or so on.
Yeah.
But then there's all these other subcultures and smaller communities perhaps who didn't buy into the American dream the same way, whether it's a good thing or not. And they do cotton into the sense of what synodality can be. I don't know. You're right. It's a paradigm shift. I really see that, and that then leads to please go ahead.
No, I just think, I don't know. There's a lot going on. Like I just think this Saint Malachi thing is kind of interesting, right?
By the way, what was his name for Pope Francis? I don't think you shared that.
Peter II. That's why I said it's this higher simplicity.
Interesting.
Higher simplicity. Peter II.
Wow.
It's the last of the line. It's the last of the line.
Or the beginning of the new. Is
Yeah,
what you're also, yeah.
For sure. For sure. And so I'm not saying, I hope everybody, the other thing that we got to say about these prophecy things or St. Michael and so forth, and it's probably some of these people you're dealing with as well, I don't know, like, can we see, the St. Michael prayer is real, but right now it's only seemingly read as like some weird incantation, like, or some political track. But so, at this time, we have to just come into some realizations. As you were, it's not a direct answer to your question, but it could kind of set me off. But when you really talk to priests, or certainly at the Abbey of the Genesee, the monks, and again, there's a call to the single life, and there's also, in many cases, not always associated with sadness, but also some sadness, people who weren't able to have children. But something I've learned working so closely with monks and priests and the bishop is that there's great respect within that celibate caste and that way of life of monks. There's great respect for what fatherhood is. There's a lot of them who go like, Mike, I don't even know how we can grow up. They just see children will raise their families, and things like that. So, the play within the play is how you catch the conscience of the king, meaning that the lady needs to know it. Those of us who've been out there, they kind of admire, some people would look at the monastery as like, it's so easy there. No. That's where on that end, I got to say, are the monks running from the world, or are we running from the monastery, right? We're running from the monastery in terms of like their silence. But on the other hand, they're pretty interested in our way of life, that we've had to hustle. I got let go from a monastery. The abbot's still one of my best friends. But, COVID happened. And the retreat house model was just done. And that like, they were just turning me loose. The idea was they were going to bring me from parish life. I would do that through retirement. I don't know. Like it was tricky. I don't know what it was going to do. But so we have to see that from their eyes, the laity has strengths we don't have. And, then another way you've got a lot of liberals in the church, or people who identify that way. I don't use that term pejoratively, but who just see their conservative, their priests coming in, they're just a little more, they could be really, if it's like Republican Party, look, that's a huge problem. But if they're just, and on the other hand, like so many are like probably clinically OCD and everything, there's a lot of autism. But let's just say the basic idea, the general thing is priests are just getting more into their basic job of being priests, right? Well, instead of just spending all of our time festering on that,
Mm-hmm.
Let them do that. But I haven't met any one of those who would stop what people are doing on their own. But there's an exception there. One would be you could have a parish priest who's kind of in that more traditionalist mold, who just, and they just don't even, it's not that they're just not interested in the cultural life of the church, but even when it's in the parish hall, they're just so worried about safety and things like that. Or I know it just costs. You actually need an insurance rider. Insurance runs the church. Again, abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place. Risk management's the new God. But on the other hand, Michael Martin would say this, and I've heard it from clerics. The church that the laity need to bring in is not going to be developed talking in buildings that have this miasma where we've all learned over generations to be so subservient, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the people who's told me that is a cleric in the Roman Catholic Church, a really conservative person.
Mm-hmm.
They get it. It's just we've been indoctrinated just so, yes, Father. We just don't think clearly.
Yeah.
You know, the people who serve on the executive stewardship committee of like my local diocese, like some of them are just so subservient. You know, they have skills. We're asking them for their skills, but their number one skill is like being obsequious, you know, to power.
Yeah.
It's really funny, but we need to clear these things up. And so, but I think that's a really important place to begin, is to see what we have. And then we start making decisions. We don't worry. We don't ask Father for permission for everything. Go and be Catholic.
Right.
I think the brand name Catholic is probably going to lose its importance. Go do the work and name it later.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could think of a ministry every day. I was thinking of so many young women in this world through just what's gone on. You know, there's worries about vaccines. There's just, are they ever going to meet a guy? But they're starting to worry at like 16 whether they're ever going to have a baby. You know, and then we're getting married, you know, and they we'll put it off to get this job because it's this over planning thing, but still worried. You know, we're not open to conception, but I'm worried about that. And these are natural. These are good people. These are good people. But we need a ministry. We got to get together, people to cut. You know, and every time they want to have babies, it's like you make love and you're peeing on a stick the next morning. Like, did it work? You know, in ourselves, we're technology. You know, that's a ministry. We need lay people who understand this. It's not going to come from the clerics. And we need
Like
to minister
the
to each other.
midwifing.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Okay, sort of 3 last questions maybe then, because there's so much going on here. Okay,
No,
one I want to
no.
ask you about youth. Okay, because you just led right into that, and that's fantastic. 2, I do want to come back and talk about maybe temporal sort of power, because it's a bit like not anti-Paul Kingsnorth, but like I'm just curious if that's any read that you have on that.
I disagree with him on that.
And I'm curious to hear, because I haven't read or heard his actual presentation, but I've heard Nostalgia rip into it. And then finally, the last letter that Rudolf Steiner ever wrote was on creating an order of St. Michael, like a Knights of the Round Table kind of thing about St. Michael. I was curious if you'd read that or had any thoughts on that. But let's come back to youth. You mentioned, what's your read on youth? Because you think you work with them so much. You spend a lot of time sitting and listening and counseling. Maybe what are some things that are surprising you about those who are taking their faith seriously, intuitions maybe that they're having to do things different?
Sometimes I think I'm more interested in those that aren't taking their faith seriously, you know, or don't know it. Again, what we're seeing now, if I use that circle, line, circle metaphor, is a blend of the pagan and the Catholic again, like more nature.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to make it my mantra, lady. The problem with schools, you know, screens in schools, the problem isn't, you know, the solution isn't schools without screens. It's nature. It's nature. So the Catholic schools need to like lead in this area, but all we're doing is imitating the public schools. But youth, you know, the youth would be with any movement that makes sense. Let's pray ourselves into this. You know, that we're kind of downward towards nature. Today there was a wonderful reading from Sirach on the divine feminine. Our bishop preached lovely on it. Let's pray ourselves into her a little bit. Let's bring her into the conversations. You know, that this theme of, again, like darkness and light is part of this. You know, we're going to bring them together. We come from the womb, but we seem to have run away from the womb. Think of like strip mining, you know, all this masculine way of relating to the divine feminine instead of just engaging with her, playing, you know, learning about her, asking her a question. You know, that's what women will say on dates. We got to bring, Anthony Eslin would answer your question, Dominic. We got to start much younger than youth, but culture's fallen apart on the genders. We would need to bring young men and young women together and let them talk. But I'm less sanguine maybe than you about this new energy. You know, again, I these anecdotes that, you know, you can get these young men just chewing their Nicorette, talking about Catholic Church all the time, telling their young rad trad wife how to be Catholic. I just don't see that that's a a seed bed for future growth. Those masses are fine. Latin mass is great. Those communities are nice. I haven't been there, but I had a guy who's been on the podcast said that, like, or there's two things about it. One would be, and prove me wrong, not prove me wrong. I don't mean that, but I'm really interested in this, like, about the Latin mass, that, like, they follow the mass, not the community, right? That people say, oh, there's a great coffee hour after. But so many people from that community would say, but sociologists could study this. If you had another Latin mass that was 5 minutes closer or 7, everybody would go there. So then where's the community? But I want to say circle 2 is community. It's community, real community. We need to have real obligations to people. And I don't think the new church begins until every individual has an experience of being drawn out of themselves. That's Illich on the Good Samaritan. One way to have it is, stop talking about the poor in general, but go meet somebody who's on hard times, but be radically committed to that person. And you're going to come out of that journey with less cash than you had. We're so addicted to money. Why wouldn't God be working through that to redeem it? It seems like most people, you'll want to walk through a time of trouble.
Yeah.
It's going to test you in your relationship with money. It's going to test you in your relationship with planning and the certainty of the future. But it's almost like the only way out is back. They say the only way out is through. But young people, I think, need to, we need, they got to make sure, I've written a front porch on this, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, I think, in America. She's our patroness. All the Americas is Our Lady of Guadalupe. But it's intimately tied to the question of, what did you want to be when you were a kid? We've got Catholic manhood would be where work is also play. But that's a hard attainment. That's not video gaming and just every third kid wanting to be a video game designer. I just think we got to see some of these tools as missing that famous thing. When I was born, this Jonathan Haidt, this screen thing is really weird. I think it goes back to photography. And so those of us who are just speeding up on the cell phone, we got to have those honest conversations. But the youth are amazing. I'd love them to speak from the first person a lot more.
Yeah.
And answer the question, again, salvation from this time is like salvation from a crowd, right? That's what Guido, Illich, it's being rescued. The biggest corruption of the worst, the corruption of the best is the worst right now, is a community and a crowd. And it's sad when crowd formations enter the church. They have. They're on the left and the right. But we needed, and I think you could be an individual, or really personhood is the correct theological term. You can find personhood in like a Latin mass community. But we got to, whatever's taking people to personhood. What did Dominic want to be when he was young? What is that thing for you, Dominic, where work is also play? I'm worried that too much of this stuff has just been stereotypes, which I understand. Nobody can see the future, because I think we have Elon Musk blinding us that the future is like these big things that kind of look like big white penises, and everything. These satellites, these fireworks displays, when we should be looking about like our bodies, like what did God make them for? And looking at and picking up dirt and smelling dirt.
Agreed. Yeah, Mars is not. Oh, there's a whole conversation too. As much as I admire a lot of what Musk has done and does, but it's like, no, running away from our problems is not. We've got to. Okay.
No, the movie Gravity is great on that. Directed by a Catholic. Yeah, Sandra Bullock.
I've not seen that.
She goes out there. She's a mom, but it's Chesterton. She came back. She cared about her daughter.
Yes.
It's outer space coming this direction.
Right.
This direction. I wrote about it at Front Porch Republic. It's called Gravity's Rainbow. Because I thought finally that movie was indicating, but it was probably just because the director was Catholic.
Yeah.
That
there seems to be a routine thing among astronauts and so on who do get up there, and there's this visceral paradigm shift that they get looking down at what our world is. And I would say that would be, it seems obvious to me. It's an intuition at a level of spirit, of relationship that we have to our world.
And wouldn't it be a lot less money than shooting these rockets up just to read Jack and the Beanstalk, right? It's there and Into the Woods. He went up high and home looked cool, right? Or go up in a plane, right? That's the thing. That's circle
Amazing.
2. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's like I just chatted with Michael Martin on this channel. Yeah, we talked about the Green Man. It's like getting to Mars, or is it rediscovering the Green Man? Like, Green Man's cheaper. It's going to change your life a lot.
And it doesn't hurt the environment. Yeah, it's a lot better on nature.
And so that's kind of my question about youth, because it it seems so obvious to me, and maybe not so much the really young ones who have been raised on a steady diet of dopamine and screens, but the ones who are like right in transition between like my age and then, the youngest right now, where our BS filters are so finely
Yeah, no, that's
attuned
right.
to
That's prophetic.
scandals and to, as Guido would say, that, the parasitical, grasping to strip mine my personhood from myself. And I would say the youth. Here, what's a great example is there's a video from the Holy Father. It was put on Hulu maybe a year or so back, where he's talking with all of these young people from around the world. And it seemed like, what was it called? Amen, I think it was called. A lot of
Sounds
it was,
familiar.
it was very interesting. It was very well done. A lot of it felt like not a hit piece, but just bombarding him with every possible answer. And I thought he fenced admirably. And then it was interesting. The one young woman who was a very devout and dedicated Catholic, he had very careful advice for her. Be careful about being overly rigid in how you're even mediating and presenting within this very conversation. It's a very, just be careful of the rigidity and of not allowing the world to literally break into you to be an actual human person and not a walking ideologue. I see with the challenge of a lot of young people, perhaps, because
Yeah.
it's my journey too, is walking away from the institution the same way that we walk away from brands. You're walking away from the egregore of what the church is, because there's that intuition of, I have to discover something that is absolutely real that convicts me,
Wow.
because I need a free relationship with this thing. I can't have an infernalist relationship where if I don't, ...
Let me
Having
apologize too, because what you're saying, you just heard me kind of beat up on the youth in one sense, but yes, the BS detector,
Mhm.
the let's just keep it there. But there's some colloquialisms too.
Mhm.
I mentioned before the only way out is through. Um, yes, yes, yes. And what I think they saw through. So the BS detector, and you tell me because you're from the generation. So the BS detector saw through the transgender thing. Again, a lot of were caught up in it. But then the reaction scares me more. But so like your generation's the best of your generation, the No BS detector podcasts and things. You have access to more things. You can see through, but I guess I'm worried about some of the reaction, right? It gets kind of
Like
in the same
over course
cycle.
correction kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I am. That the online kind of male culture, again, even
Oh,
in Catholic
100%
red
agree.
trad, or think of your father's tradition, like the gender roles.
Mhm.
It's really funny, that why would we go back to slavery? I thought it was neat, that there's a lot of different ways of being female. That doesn't mean women or men. There's a
Mhm.
lot of different ways to be masculine, and some
Right.
men are quite feminine. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean men or women. But why does the reaction from transgenderism? There's no such thing as gender. You
Mhm.
see it. There's a lot. It doesn't mean it's everywhere, but there's a lot of. But there's this other sense too, right? That there's a real openness. You know, think of the gay community. Nobody or we're kind of losers in school. I think my son Aiden, who's been on the podcast, he would say we beat bullying.
Mhm.
Is that? Would you agree with that? He goes like my generation stopped bullying. Do you
I
think there's anything to that? Aiden's a very thoughtful young man.
I'd be very interested to hear where he goes with that. I'm not sure that it's true, because I see this what's called the censorship industrial complex that's now being dismantled like almost just incredibly quickly. We just translated bullying. Who's it who's saying this? I'm struggling to remember. Maybe it's
And I
Michael
think he would
Martin.
say only for his generation that this could be the icebreaker coming up. But go ahead. What you're saying is important.
Well, I'm struggling to remember who it was who said this. Oh no, it's Jordan Peterson. That's where it is. Where
Okay,
he
yeah,
talks about the censorship industrial complex. I'm paraphrasing his words.
sure.
We not only sort of castrated masculine energy and in public discourse, but then we overleaned into the dark feminine as a mode of mediating and controlling conversation. And the course correction that goes back the other way is when you have, rah sort of masculinity that's trying to push back as it's rediscovering itself after generations of being routinely labeled as toxic and told to take yourself off the board. It's going to be a mess trying to refigure that out. I was just seeing a reel just the other day that I thought was very, very smart. which was it's very easy to define toxic masculinity. But if you were to go back and then ask people, well, then what is non-toxic? How would you define non-toxic masculinity? And you routinely get definitions of a feminine, traits. So we have nothing to go in that bucket of what is a positive masculine contribution to being alive. And we absolutely need to figure that out. We're making a mess of it with all of our stupid Andrew Tate stuff.
Yes.
But it's partly an over course correction. I think that, God willing, we'll figure it out. Get back to something, largely because, like you said, I love the metaphor of the dandelion breaking through the concrete or growing through the concrete.
Ivan Illich.
Nature will not be gainsaid. And I think that as bad as the French Revolution has been and all of these revolutions, see, here's why Guido's book was so powerful or just intriguing to me. It's because I grew up reading a book called Revolution, Counter-Revolution by Plinio Correia de Oliveira, who founded traditional family property. Anyhow, his idea was that there's a 4-century-old conspiracy theory that can be, what's the word? Very clearly outlined, decade over decade, century over century, charting the earliest revolution. Is it the first one? Protestant Reformation through to today, with a dark school of adherents or something like this. And it's just too neat a conspiracy theory. Because it's like the conspiracy of all conspiracies. It's like modernism being read into everything and like everything answers everything. You end up in like an infinite spiral, an infinite regress because, well, you can answer everything. Like, oh, it's the slow pace of the revolution or it's the fast pace of the revolution, for everything. Whereas now that I'm stepping outside of that conspiracy mindset and that apocalyptic mindset and looking at history, and I'm realizing, hold on, life during the time of the French Revolution was absolutely awful. And I could see reality, it could be maybe Sophia, not rolling over in her grave, but sort of the seismic shift of humanity recognizing this is inhumane and unjust. And the course correction swings too far, but it breaks through the ice and the grit so that we are able to start to be a little more human. Do wrong things happen? Did we figure it out? No. Should that situation have been maintained? Can you imagine what the present would have been like without the French Revolution? And I'm not saying it was a good thing. Same thing with like the Protestant Reformation. I think that there's aspects of this, which is a fundamental aspect of the human spirit that was, at the same time it was being repressed, it was also being, what are the words here? Articulated and lived out and expressed through a variety of religious communities, and then specific figures, charismatic, actionable, figures cottoned onto this and effectively changed the course of history and kept breaking the mold. And this is where I'm interested in so with Guido, and he talks about parasites and we're being locked down, and Steiner talks about the world being netted over by these, I don't know, maybe it's metaphorical or not, cobwebs of, spidery-like things that anchor us down and sort of throttle the life out of us. And then I think, well, there are all these ancient stories where we're constantly facing giants. Our mythology is rooted in the idea we're constantly facing and weaving our way around and climbing up around and bringing down giants. And I wonder if this is just routinely a thing with the human condition. Anyhow, it's a mess.
I'd say for Guido, the readers who want to venture into like empire and church, they need to, and I think it's a fair question, Dominic, that you're saying, from your background, like a too neat conspiracy. People need to know that it's very strong for him, the British Empire, which after World War I became.
And I don't, this is why the book challenges me. I don't disagree with him. I think he's right.
I think he's
right.
And
it would seem to validate a lot of that book that I read, but now I'm struggling because I know that is a all too neat drawing of the noose.
Yeah.
Whereas his does wrestle with a lot more of the messiness, I think, and the reality of history.
Does think of the schema that you are given, but the one would be like freedom is always like a force and tries to break out than freedom, but the increasing incarnation of the logos. Once we think of that, like Christ is the center point of history, and think that Dominic de Souza is less likely to have to do what his dad or grandfather did than we were a while ago. For the history of the muse, from being outside us to now asking a genius, it's in the innermost sense of where I am I. The increasing personhood of the person, that Dostoevsky would say, Theophane the Recluse, Dostoevsky could see more. There's an increasing thing going on. The importance of the individual had to be worked out over time. The Christian, Rene Girard, and, the ferment was planted, but that one man should not die for the people. So that's kind of an organic way. And I think something like that is definitely working on. And at a certain point, the themes of said incarnation become a different musical register. And I think that's what we're getting to in our time with this language of the age of Aquarius. I would say the divine feminine, light mixed with darkness, such that, so think of even Jordan Peterson himself. For me, he got let out of a crowd, but into too much so another crowd. That Father Ed Dillon, who I mentioned, would talk about his friends, never had the common sense to shake a following. The biggest one for me now is to rescue people individually from a crowd, because that's being saved, right? Lord, I'm saved. Because the idea, we need to step out, and that I would say you could have somebody who steps out from one crowd to go into another crowd, right? But the John Michael Greer had a tweet last week that he's just pretty prophetic. But what do we mean by people need to learn to think for themselves? So that's tricky. So everybody says it would be this Stephen Vizentu I mentioned a lot. He said, to find another author who sees the world the exact way you see it is literally mind blowing. But so I would tell college students, they would say, what makes you tick, Sauter? And I don't know, I just kind of know what I like and what I don't like. And certain books speak to me, other ones don't. And I wrote to this guy, Stephen Vizentu. It was the first book I really liked, and I wrote to him. My mom was dying of pancreatic cancer, and I knew he was raised Catholic. I told on Regeneration once or twice, toppled the statue of Stalin in Hungary, got across the Adriatic, lived with Joni Mitchell in Toronto, got into a fist fight with Michael Landon, wrote the greatest erotic novel of the 20th century in praise of older women. He and I had some correspondence. But the idea that this is a way of saying, to college students, I'd say an author who spoke to me. And for 9 out of 10 students, that might be J.K. Rowling. No. How to become yourself, what do we mean? But we need to get young people, we need to keep them away from screens to say, what is my young child interested in? That in my ministerial work, the playing with Band-Aids, that's the healing arts. That's not being a doctor necessarily. But to nurture those things, but like a plant, tend childhood. This is the most awesome responsibility. And that if we're lost, like so many people listening to this, we're lost, the greatest, say one less rosary this week and spend 20 minutes thinking about what did I want to be when I was a child? I don't know. Let me talk to my mom. Be grateful if your mom's still alive, and call her and say, hey, Mom, tell me about, I'm lost. That this is what spirituality is in our time. We could say 5 more Pater Nosters,
Yeah.
but
I'm not convinced that's always the best thing.
yeah, right. Yep. And so that's, I think, that there's this theme here that we can do this. But that's where the church, this is the big thing you started the podcast off with, Dominic, is that the worst can be the corruption of the best. And one sense of Mother Church is let's not be surprised. We can sleep at night. We make the choice. Do we go to Mother Church? We're so grateful she tells us to have, meet at 11:59, but not at 12:01. It doesn't mean that's not a good practice. But is that a mother that keeps us infantile, like Rapunzel locked in a tower, or is an educating mother? Is alma mater, is education? Which one is it? Let's be honest with ourselves. What did I receive? And let's look at medicine the same way. Is it liberating, sending forth, or is it an enslaving type of mother? And that's going to be a great clarifying question. That's where Jordan Peterson, you used a phrase, he talked about the dark feminine. I get it. But I think we can get much farther as Christians now being a crowd. We need the feminine so much. Jordan Peterson, I think, is enabling a lot of people who don't see our need for the real feminine. It's so pronounced at our time that let's just call it crowd phenomenon. And Jordan Peterson, you got caught up in one yourself. You got addicted to your crowd. We can't. So everybody listening to this, read the Gospels. The gospel cannot be heard from a crowd. It can be heard in community. Just at the bottom of the Israelites, when they're fracturing, they can't even hear the 10 Commandments. They have to be unified. We go to church as a one in many. It's an ontological reality to hear the gospel. There's something really new about it. But the truth can't be heard from a crowd. Politicians speak to crowds. And we need to get to a Christianity of people where we hear it as individuals. That doesn't mean just church in the round or going back to the 1970s. Most of those fears about the 1970s are shibboleths. I have a big suspicion, like, turn over every rock. Don't look at the 1970s. Probably it was a first, like the 1960s were a first trial at some of what we need to get back. Distrust of big power, peace, love, and understanding. The 1970s, probably in Catholicism, probably just like the modern left. It's all institutional. If we could take some of the insights and take it from institutional to just like what I do to a neighbor, well, gosh, the modern left has something to it. And I think the 70s, maybe 70s Catholicism is the source of some of our woes. Look in the most unsuspecting places, and it would be 1970s Catholicism. Healing was the theme, right? There's so many books. You go look at all these tacky books at all these retreat. In my job with the diocese, I go around to churches for all these nighttime meetings, and I go to retreat houses. And they all have the same bookshelf. It's great, just Catholic books. And but you can see them by decade. And the 70s had a lot of books on healing. Isn't that neat? Cast the whole gospel in terms of healing. That's what the age of Aquarius is going to be about, healing, not going to be about like torture eternal, torture and torture eternal, sin and punishment. There's different themes in the gospel. It's again about the derivation of whole. We're going to see again holiness and being whole. These are the realities we're dealing with. So we can pray ourselves into that, and you'll see fruits in your life.